The First Return. The story of obsession begins by following Bear Bailey, a shy young man who works at a record store alongside his friends Ian, Sarah, and Nikki Freeman. For a long time, he has been in love with Nikki, but he's never had the courage to tell her. His best friend Ian constantly pushes him to make a move, but Bear always finds an excuse to put off the conversation. One night, while hanging out with friends, he finally seems close to finding the courage. When the night comes to an end, he offers to drive Nikki home. Standing outside her house, Nikki notices that he's acting strange and asks him directly, "Do you like me?" It's the perfect opportunity to finally tell the truth. But as always, Bear freezes and doesn't tell her how he feels. Frustrated with himself, he sits alone in his car replaying the conversation in his head. That's when he finds the One Wish Willow, a strange toy he had purchased earlier that day from a store. The shopkeeper had even warned him that many people regretted the wishes they made with the object, but Bear completely ignored the warning. Without thinking about the consequences, he breaks the toy and makes a wish that Nikki would love him more than anyone else in the world. At first, nothing happens, but when he looks up, he sees Nikki standing outside her house, completely still, just staring at the car. She walks over and says she doesn't want to be alone. At first, she invites Bear inside, but moments later changes her mind and insists on going to his house instead. During the conversation, she claims that her father is dying of cancer and begins crying desperately. Bear immediately agrees to help her, but signs that something is wrong quickly begin to appear. In one of the first strange moments after the wish, her behavior changes completely. While talking to Bear, Nikki suddenly seems to lose track of where she is. She looks around in confusion and blurts out a curse word, like someone who just woke up in the middle of a situation they don't understand. The moment only lasts a few seconds, but it gains enormous significance once we learn the truth. That wasn't the obsessed Nikki created by the wish. That was the real Nikki regaining consciousness for the first time. She seems unable to understand why she's acting that way. But before she can say anything important, the confusion fades and she goes right back to acting as if nothing happened. To Bear, it simply looks like another emotional reaction caused by her supposed issues with her father. But the real Nikki is still trapped inside. Something else is just in control. The first kiss. That night, Nikki stays at Bear's house. The two end up sharing a bed, and that's when one of the most important scenes in the beginning of the movie takes place. While they're together, Nikki leans in and kisses Bear. For a few seconds, everything seems normal, but then the situation changes abruptly. In the middle of the kiss, Nikki suddenly panics. She immediately pulls away and shows genuine fear. Her reaction is so intense that it leaves Bear completely shocked. Just seconds earlier, she seemed perfectly calm, but now she's acting like someone who just woke up inside a nightmare. The reason is that the real Nikki has regained consciousness once again, but it only lasts for about a second. The first date. After the frightening incident during their first kiss, Bear's life seems to get back on track. The next morning, Nikki acts as though nothing happened. When he asks about her strange behavior the previous night, she quickly comes up with an explanation. Because Bear is in love and wants to believe her, he accepts the answer without questioning it. From that point on, the two officially start dating. But the people around them begin noticing that something feels off. During a date at a restaurant, Ian, one of Bear's closest friends, calls him and warns him that shortly before they started dating, Nikki had told Sarah that she saw Bear almost like a little brother. On top of that, Ian discovers that the story about her father dying of cancer isn't true. The more he watches the situation unfold, the more convinced he becomes that something doesn't add up. Suddenly, Nikki surprises Bear with an unexpected gift, a crystal known as Tiger's Eye. She explains that she believes in the spiritual meaning of crystals and reveals that the stone is extremely important to her. According to Nikki, it belonged to her mother and carries tremendous sentimental value. It's a seemingly simple moment, but it became one of the most discussed scenes in the movie. The reason is that when viewed alongside the rest of the story, the gift takes on a completely different meaning. Before making the wish, Bear mentions that he once considered buying something similar for Nikki, but decided against it because he believed she would hate that kind of gift. That small detail shows that despite being in love with her, he didn't actually know her as well as he thought he did. Meanwhile, the Nikki controlled by the wish does the exact opposite. She gives away one of the most important objects in her life without a second thought. The scene becomes even more interesting when you consider the traditional meaning of Tiger's Eye. The stone is commonly associated with courage, willpower, and mental clarity. Because of that, many fans believe that the real Nikki was trying to communicate through that gesture. A moment later, Bear asks if her father is really sick, and that's when she completely loses it. But he quickly calms her down by saying that he doesn't care whether the story was true or not. Another curious moment in this scene is when Nikki says she loves him more than anything in the world. If you look closely, she doesn't even look him in the eyes while saying it. Alone in bed. The situation between Bear and Nikki continues becoming stranger and stranger. Even after all the signs that something is wrong, Bear insists on believing that everything is fine. At this point in the story, her behavior is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Moments of excessive affection are frequently interrupted by unexpected reactions, and one of the creepiest scenes happens after the couple's first night together. Bear is sleeping normally when he wakes up at 3 a.m. and realizes that he's alone in bed. But where is Nikki? Right there in the corner, watching him sleep. Seriously, that scene is disturbing. Suddenly, she starts crying and says that he doesn't love her her enough. For a brief moment, it seems like the real Nikki manages to take control again. She clearly rejects the situation she's trapped in, saying that it doesn't feel mutual. Then she switches back to the other personality and starts screaming, asking why he doesn't love her. Just as suddenly, Nikki calms down and gets back into bed. Meanwhile, Ian remains suspicious of everything that's happening. Sarah also notices that Nikki isn't acting like herself, and even Bear is beginning to realize that something is deeply wrong. Well, it's about time. The message in the photo. One morning, Bear wakes up and finds Nikki in the kitchen doing something unexpected with Sandy, his cat that had died earlier in the story after ingesting oxycodone pills. She has put together a sort of farewell ceremony using the animal's remains. The scene is strange and makes Bear uncomfortable, but he doesn't ask many questions. At that moment, he believes it's simply an unusual way of coping with the cat's death. After that, Nikki begins acting more intensely than ever. She's constantly by Bear's side, watching his every move and trying to show affection at all times. Any small amount of distance between them seems to make her uneasy. At one point, Nikki prepares a meal for him and packs everything into a lunchbox. The gesture appears to be just another act of affection. Later at work, Bear takes another look inside the lunchbox. Among the objects and photographs placed inside, there's something different. A handwritten message. The phrase is short, "Not me." Bear stares at the words without fully understanding what they mean. But okay, he grabs the food and takes a big bite. Yummy! The message seems to have been hidden there in secret. It doesn't match the behavior of the obsessive Nikki, who has spent the last few days desperately trying to please him. But before he can make sense of it, another disturbing discovery is made. Sarah finds a note Nikki had hidden inside Bear's jacket. When he reads the message, he realizes something horrifying. The ritual with Sandy wasn't just a farewell ceremony. The cat's remains were used in the lunch Nikki prepared for him, the very lunch he just took a bite from. Shocked, he immediately gets sick. Everything that had seemed merely strange suddenly takes on a much darker meaning. As he tries to process what he has just learned, his eyes return to the hidden message among the photographs. Now those words feel different. For the first time since the wish was made, the real Nikki manages to leave a clear warning. The phone call. The hidden message in the lunchbox completely changes the way Bear sees the situation. Desperate for answers, Bear decides to do something he should have done much earlier. Call One Wish Willow customer support. When the call is answered, Bear tries to explain what happened and asks for help reversing the wish. He wants to know if there's any way to cancel everything and bring the real Nikki back, but the answer is anything but encouraging. On the other end of the line, he learns that the wish cannot be reversed so easily. The representative explains that the effect only ends when either Bear or Nikki dies. The revelation is already horrible on its own, but the conversation gets even worse. At one point, the employee asks if Bear would like to speak with her. Moments later, the call is transferred and a desperate voice emerges on the other end. It's the real Nikki. For the first time, Bear hears her suffering directly. Nikki sounds trapped somewhere terrifying. For Bear, that moment destroys any remaining doubt. His wish didn't make Nikki fall in love with him. Instead, it created something far worse, turning the person he cared about into a prisoner inside her own mind. A quick fun fact: the voice of the One Wish Willow customer service representative is actually the film's director, Curry Barker. The party. That night, Nikki insists on going to a party at Ian's house, even though several people are already suspicious of her behavior. The atmosphere feels strange from the start. Ian clearly doesn't like having her there. Sarah is uncomfortable as well, and Bear tries to act normal in the middle of all that tension. During the party, the group starts playing a game. At first, it seems like nothing more than a distraction, but things quickly spiral out of control. Nikki begins acting increasingly strange in front of everyone. Her stories become disturbing, her reactions become exaggerated, and the mood of the party changes completely. Then another one of the rare moments occurs when the real Nikki surfaces. Suddenly, she breaks down and screams at everyone. It's probably the most direct attempt to ask for help up to that point in the story. For the first time, she manages to use her own voice to warn everyone that something is wrong. She's surrounded by people who know her, including Sarah and Ian. She then grabs a bottle and smashes it into her own face in an attempt to escape the agony. But the moment doesn't last long. The breakdown terrifies everyone at the party and completely changes the atmosphere. The result is the exact opposite of what Nikki hoped for. Instead of convincing people she needs help, it makes her look like she's simply losing emotional control. For Bear, the moment is devastating. He knows it wasn't just another episode. What's even worse is that despite seeing her in that state, he does nothing except sit there. After that phone call, he knows exactly who was speaking. It was the real Nikki, and she was desperately trying to tell everyone that she was still trapped inside. The bedroom scene. After the party, Nikki takes Bear back home. Her behavior is more unstable than ever. The version created by the Wish displays extreme attachment and begins making emotional threats to prevent him from leaving. At one point, she even says she might take her own life if he doesn't stay by her side. Bear is completely lost. Later that night, Sarah sends him a message asking to meet at a park. She's also worried about everything that's happening and wants to talk somewhere away from Nikki. When Bear tries to quietly leave the house, something unexpected happens. For the first time in the movie, the real Nikki manages to remain in control for longer than just a few seconds. Nikki begins crying and finally explains part of what's happening. She says that the other presence is asleep at the moment, which has allowed her to stay in control longer. It's a rare opportunity and probably one of the only chances she'll ever get to speak freely. And what she asks leaves Bear shocked. Instead of begging to be saved, Nikki asks to die. For Nikki, remaining remaining trapped like this is worse than any other alternative. She's aware of everything that's happening, yet unable to stop any of it. The idea horrifies and hurts Bear. He can't accept that Nikki would rather die than stay with him. It's the desperate plea of someone who can no longer endure being a prisoner inside her own body. But Bear reveals who he truly is in that moment, more concerned about his own ego than her suffering. The awakening. Nikki's desperate request marks the beginning of the film's final act. Sarah continues investigating Nikki's behavior and tries to help Bear understand what's happening. During a conversation in the car, she reveals another important detail. Nikki and Ian had been casually involved for about 2 years. In other words, his best friend, the same friend who kept encouraging him to confess his feelings to Nikki, had already been with her for a very long time. What a beautiful friendship. The revelation completely shatters the fantasy Bear had built in his head. But before he can process it all, the situation takes an even darker turn. The obsessive personality controlling Nikki has become completely unpredictable. After Sarah suggests that Nikki might have feelings for Bear, Nikki suddenly appears and kills her. Seeing this, Bear panics, but Nikki tries to calm him down, and shortly afterward, the two place Sarah's body in the trunk of a car. Desperate to undo the mistake that caused all of this, Bear returns to the store and buys every one-wish willow he can find. His hope is to make a new wish capable of canceling the first one, but every attempt fails. Each person only gets one wish, and he had already used his. With no alternatives left, he goes to Ian and tells him the entire truth. Bear begs him to make a wish that will bring the real Nikki back. Naturally, Ian thinks the whole thing is ridiculous, but his skepticism disappears when he wishes for $1 billion and actually gets it. Unfortunately, Bear's hope disappears at the same moment. Shortly afterward, Bear returns home carrying the last remaining one-wish willow. But when he arrives, he finds a horrifying scene. Things have gone way too far. Nikki is now completely dominated by the obsessive entity. She appears wearing Sarah's clothes, and events begin escalating rapidly. Ian shows up to celebrate the $1 billion he just received, but he dies moments later. Nikki is completely out of control. Bear tries to escape and locks himself inside the bathroom while desperately searching for a way to survive. Unable to see any way out, he takes the remaining oxycodone pills. Almost immediately, he regrets it and tries to reverse the situation, but he can't, because outside the bathroom, the obsessive personality finally breaks the last one-wish willow. Bear, who now also no longer has control over his own body, walks out of the bathroom and kisses her. At the same time, he begins suffering the effects of the overdose. Shortly afterward, he dies, and with his death, the wish finally comes to an end. For the first time since the beginning of the film, the real Nikki regains permanent control of her body. When she wakes up, she doesn't find the romance the entity tried to create. She finds destruction, death, and the aftermath of everything she was forced to witness without being able to stop it. Bear is dead. Ian is dead. The house is in complete chaos. Confused, terrified, and unable to fully understand how she returned, Nikki looks around and realizes the tragedy that unfolded while she was imprisoned. She's finally free, but that freedom came far too late, and that's how the movie ends. This is without a doubt a fate worse than death. And if you want to see more fates worse than death in horror movies, click the video on your screen. I'll see you there.